Hey, what's going on guys? It's Dark and I'm back with another video. So if you've seen video on my channel before, it's probably the Sporebloom build with bottom feeder where I did a breakdown on how broken that was. However, they nerfed it. But the idea is not dead. This idea still works, there just has to be some changes. And I'm here to explain to you how Ritualist managed to save this build. Then even if it's not as strong as it once was, it still is very strong. And if you enjoy these build videos and want to see more, it would be greatly appreciated if you could like and subscribe. So by now you've probably noticed that it's the crossbow now instead of using Sporebloom. And this is because Sporebloom got nerfed with the One True King update to have its rounds per second from 3.5 down to 1.5. I was just looking through some of the other guns, but then I came across the crossbow and I realized it has a very similar RPS even if its damage is about half of what Sporebloom's base damage is. But this is okay because with what we lose from Sporebloom, we can somewhat make up for with the Ritualist archetype and its third skill, Death Wish. Then we put on corrosive rounds for extra crit chance on the crossbow, and then on your handgun, just run a mod and mutator, which can easily proc a couple more status effects. Now you might ask, why do these status effects matter? Why do we need 3 different status effects if we're just going to be running Ritualist and it really is only going to benefit from the extra status effect? Well, that's a good question, and it's because it's a bunch of extra damage over time, and it's in combination with running the Ahanai crystal, which will deal 5% extra damage from each status effect the target is suffering from, but this is a multiplicative damage bonus, which is actually really big. Now for our archetypes and skills, these are actually a little bit more variable now than they used to be. So before it was Hunter Gunslinger, but we still want Hunter for the most part just because it has outrageous range damage bonuses, and Hunter's Focus to go with it because also absolutely outrageous range damage bonuses. But you could maybe swap this if you're going to fight a boss that doesn't have a weak spot, and there are always like okay other archetypes that you could run too. Challenger if you're up close, or Alchemist with its Frenzy Dust is pretty solid as well. And then the main focus that really brought this build back was Ritualist archetype. And that's because you get 20% damage to all enemies affected by a negative status effect. And obviously, we've gone over our weapons and we know that we can easily proc status effects. And 10% crit chance, which is more than most other archetypes, which is really nice. But then the thing that really brings it up is this Death Wish skill. The level 10 Ritualist skill, giving a 35% increase to all damage, like 35% all damage increase, is just as strong as being right next to somebody with the Challenger skill. It's this 35% in addition to the 20% damage is 55% bonus if they're afflicted with a status effect for damage from one archetype. That's almost as outrageous as Hunter. Not to mention it's 10% crit, not 5% crit too. So for the Amulets and Rings in this build, they are variable depending on the boss you're fighting obviously, and even then you have more choices. So the best damage one is definitely Abrasive Whetstone, but not everything is bleedable. And you might get bored of using that. So you can go for some different options. There's obviously a lot of different options, but some good ones are Ankh of Power, our Nightweaver's Grudge. Now for the rings, ideally you'll be running something like this. Obviously this is dependent on the boss having a weak spot because otherwise Zanya's Malice is garbage. But Akari Warband, we throw our grenade at the beginning of the fights to proc this, and 15% crit and crit damage, multiplicative bonus, multiplicative crit damage bonus. Ahanai's Crystal is a multiplicative all damage bonus. Still not sure why it's multiplicative, but it is, and I'm not going to question it. And then weak spot damage is also multiplicative, so this is wonderful. You can alternatively, if you don't want to do all the status effects, you swap Ahanai's Crystal out for Ring of Flawed Beauty, for instance, or if the boss doesn't have a weak spot, you can go into Gamblers, and Ahanai's then would be great. This would be a good setup too. So you do have options, and play around with the new rings too. I don't have all of them yet, but I'm sure there's some cool ones that can fit in. For instance, Atonement Fold is kind of interesting by giving a 10% crit chance too. Now quickly going over your Relic and Fragment, I picked the Enlarged Heart just because it's quick to use, and it heals your entire health, even if it halves your relic capacity. And then Fragments, the classic damage bonus ones, ranged crit chance, ranged crit damage, and fire rate. These are probably the strongest ones to buff your damage while bottom feeder is active, but not all boss fights can be ended while bottom feeder is active, and I'll go over that a little bit later. To quickly go over your traits, I mostly just went for tankiness, because on the odd chance you do take a hit, I want it to be survivable. But if you do it right and it is a boss that you can go 100 to 0 real quick, then this won't matter. Affliction and Longshot come with your archetypes: Fortify, Regrowth, Strong Back, Vigor, Park Skin, and Siphoner, all for tankiness and longevity. Endurance and Recovery for stamina regen, and if you ever have to dodge a whole bunch. Swiftness, because this is just my comfort pick and I love it. And then Glutton, just to use any consumables that little bit faster to buff before boss fights. Now, before, I got a lot of questions on the effectiveness of this build on bosses, such as Annihilation. This build will not be able to just 100 to 0 Annihilation. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of how tanky he is. Same kind of deal with One True King. I haven't tested it extensively on One True King, so I'm not 100% certain. And there are other limitations to this build too. For instance, there's some bosses that have invulnerability phases or that just kind of disappear halfway through. These are like Primogenitor or Mother Mind. It just cannot kill those super quickly. Bosses with armor, such as Legion, or bosses that go into phases where they just have pure armor, like Bloat King. This build will not be able to absolutely obliterate those guys either. But this is part of the greatness of these type of games, in my opinion, is that it's not a one build can destroy all. There are absolutely like matchup things to consider, and you should be swapping around builds all the time. So then you can create new builds, try out new things, and that's a lot of the fun in this game to me. But anyways, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one, where I'll hopefully have some sort of more pure Ritualist build with dots.